morning, everyone. Just like to disclose, I am a bit nervous. So thank you all for being here today as we engage in this important conversation as part of the Ndijongile exhibition, which takes place during Albinism Awareness Month this September. Ndijongile, meaning I have looked in isiXhosa, serves as a powerful reminder of the presence and voices of persons living with albinism within our society. Ndijongile, representations of persons with albinism in South African visual culture, explores the portrayal of persons living with albinism in contemporary South African visual art over the past 2 decades. This exhibition presents a dual approach, a solo exhibition and a group show, each providing unique insights into the evolving depiction of the albinistic body. The group exhibition, comprising of artworks by South African artists Andile Bala, Nganyezi Gumede, Spiwe Vilagazi, Peter Hugo, and Gamekelo Mashaba, who will be joining us as a speaker today, offers a broad examination of the representation of persons living with albinism and how it has shifted from stigmatized depictions to contemporary portrayals advocating for rights and inclusion. By showcasing a diverse range of artistic methodologies and perspectives, the exhibition reflects societal changes and engages audiences in a critical dialogue about evolving attitudes about albinism. It highlights the transition from early, often irrational representations to more nuanced and constructive portrayals that challenge stereotypes and promote inclusivity. The solo exhibition by myself complements this broader exploration by focusing on portraiture as a form of activism, featuring works that I had created during my residency in Havana, Cuba, and subsequent projects in South Africa. The artworks are influenced by Cuban artistic techniques, and moving beyond self-portraits, the body of works include diverse community members of different races, ages, and genders, reflecting a shift from personal to collective narratives. The integration of Cuban techniques and expanded scope highlights themes of visibility and collective resilience. Ndijongile seeks to pay homage to victims of Muti killings, such as Gabsile Shabani, whose story underpins the exhibition's themes. The exhibition aims to challenge stereotypes, raise awareness, and drive cultural change through compelling visual storytelling. It features thematic installations and immersive pieces to deepen the understanding of persons living with albinism experiences and inspire action. Additionally, the exhibition integrates research and community insights to highlight social injustices and policy gaps related to albinism. Informative displays and documentations, such as the timeline, which is upstairs in the exhibition, offers visitors context on these issues, while this panel discussion will provide expert perspectives and advocates for policy changes. Ndijongile aims to foster awareness, encourage dialogue, and to drive tangible improvements in how persons with albinism are perceived, treated both in South Africa, Africa, and globally. Today's panel will be thought-provoking and multifaceted, delving into the lived experience of persons living with albinism in our country. We have structured the discussion into 2 sections. In the first section, we will focus on policy, inclusion, and activism. We will explore the current landscape of policies that affect persons living with albinism, examining how inclusive practices can be implemented and what rights must be upheld to ensure a fair and just society for all. In the second segment of the panel, we will shift to focus on arts, media, and representation. Here we will discuss the impact of visual culture, media portrayals, and artistic expression in shaping public perception and understanding of albinism. We are honored today to have a diverse panel of experts and advocates with us today, each bringing unique insights and experiences. I encourage you to listen actively reflect on the discussions, and feel free to engage during the Q&A section. Before I delve into my questions, I'd like to introduce our first set of speakers. Before me, and I'd like to ask if you could just wave to the audience. I've got Abongile Kantini, and I've got Mpho Chope. Abongile Kantini is a disability inclusion consultant and DEIB expert. Kantini holds degrees from Rhodes University and Bishop's University, focusing on philosophy. Her expertise encompass social behaviors, personhood development, and the impact of disability policy on regional and international development. As CEO of the Middle Way Advisors and board member of the Soul City Institute, she collaborates with organizations such as the UNDP and the United Nations. Abongile hosts webinars and writes on disability and DEIB issues, while her service dog, Sadie, supports her in navigating public spaces. She serves as a companion in their activism. She enjoys growing bonsais and has a black belt. Wow. And then Mpho Chope is a prominent activist and advocate for persons with albinism in South Africa, Africa, and beyond. Having served as regional coordinator for the Africa Albinism Network and chairperson of the South African National Albinism Task Force, he has founded Albinism Access, Advocacy for Access, and the I Can Be campaign. Chope is recognized as a top 100 shining star and an Obama Africa youth leader. Mpho has collaborated with various organizations such as Amnesty International, the Human Rights Commission, the United Nations, and UNESCO to promote human rights and advocate for persons with albinism. He has also contributed to a magnitude of research papers on albinism. So, persons with albinism of all ages, races, and genders are subjected to systematic violence and discrimination daily in South Africa, owing to irrational cultural beliefs and a lack of education. As a result, many of us live with the fear that we may be harmed, raped, or abducted and killed for our body parts. And Mpho, with what I've just said, I would like to ask you, and Abongile, I'd invite your comments as well, how do you think education and awareness campaigns can address misconceptions about albinism and persons with albinism?
With education, you are educating more people. More people can be able to know what is actually albinism and what needs to be done for it to be addressed. For an example, with advocacy, you are able to ensure that you have the right knowledge transferred to people. For an example, this engagement is also a form of advocacy. We can change perception or perspective about albinism. So I think it is quite important to have such an engagement. It plays a role in highlighting the challenges that are there for people with albinism. So yeah.
What this for me represents is people understanding that as persons with albinism, we aren't hiding, you know. We are part of mainstream society and we are living full lives. And the idea around disabling, and I like how you said an albinic body, it's not us who have the problem. I think for a really long time, people have looked at us and said, yeah, no, they don't die. It's actually society who believes that. So the change isn't us. We're never going to change. We're going to live our full lives. But it's really about, do people outside get that they need to get out of the way? And getting out of the way means allowing us to be in schools, you know, allowing kids to play like other kids, allowing men to feel free to start relationships with any other race. And so the advocacy for me about this is to get people to not understand, to understand that albinism isn't a small community. We are everywhere. We are in every race. And I also think this is important because it is allowing people to really see the depth of albinism, and actually not just the surface killings, but the real depth, what your artwork is representing, and the positions that us as experts and as persons with albinism can play in your advocacy.
With that being said, I would like to then ask, what role does activism and public engagement play in changing perceptions and increasing visibility for persons with albinism? And this question is for the both of you.
So it's similar to, slightly different, but similar to your previous question where you were asking about advocacy. I think this area around what does advocacy mean? It means that we are opening up the conversation for people to come in. We are opening up the conversation for persons who are from any other background to become allies. And I think for any other marginalized group, if you are marginalized, you can dance and do whatever, people are not going to change and show up to back you up. So we've got to have mainstream society going, hey, here is a problem we need to sort out. And if I believe that this is a problem, let me step in and be an ally and, march with them to social development. Say no to the Instagram attacks that we've been having. Attend the Kehlelezi court case for the fact that he incited incredible hate speech and violence against. So that is an opportunity for everybody else to come in and become an ally. This awareness isn't for us. It's for everybody else.
I think it plays a major role. If you look at public engagement, is where we can meet and discuss and shape perspective and share what is actually, because a lot of people have different views about albinism. So with engagement, that's the only way we can change society. With activism, that's where we can be actually directly involved and help persons with albinism. If you look, for an example, there is a case where there's two boys with albinism, not far from here in Gauteng. They've been 10 years without at an orphanage. So they've stayed 10 years at an orphanage without their families coming to view to visit them and so forth. So it is only through that we were able to engage, and we've actually assisted them to see their mother's side of family. This December, I'll be taking them to see the father's side in Mafikeng. So activism plays a huge role in ensuring that the rights of persons with albinism are actually seen. Persons with albinism's issues are actually attended to, be it in schools where there has been issues of discrimination, and we go there and speak with these whether it's teachers or schools learners, whether we speak with young mothers of children with albinism to understand the condition. It is quite important to be involved, because activism is when you meet with these people who are affected. And I think taking that knowledge and taking everything else to public engagement, even the arts, is a form of public engagement, because that's where representation. When people view albinism as this, but now we have artists who are able to portray albinism in a way that they are involved, instead of just having conversations where people are having conversation and we are at the background and people are talking for us. We are able to be here and say, well, this is the right way, maybe for an example, to address even albinism. This is how this should be done. So it's quite important to have public engagements, because it can even influence policies that are being put there. So yeah, it is quite important. Those two are very important, because they can even change attitudes, both of persons with albinism and persons without albinism, because there's been cases where persons with albinism feel, because of the abuse that has been dealt with. I mean, I always make an example and say, if somebody says maybe your dress is not nice, for the whole day you're not gonna feel comfortable. But now people with albinism are said, the people say whatever they want to say with us. They call us different names, and yet we are supposed to show up as the best versions of ourselves. And I think it is through public engagement that we are able to address issues, get people involved, and so on. Thank you.
I actually like what you said in terms of persons with albinism actually speaking for themselves, but because for the longest time there's been this notion that persons with albinism, actually persons with disabilities, cannot speak for themselves. They always have to be spoken for. And to add to that, I will say this question is for you as a DEIB consultant, and for our audience members who actually don't know what DEIB stands for, is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. As a DEIB consultant, how can DEIB principles be applied to improve the treatment, the perception, and the representations of persons with albinism?
Thank you. This is my favorite topic. So a lot of the work that is done around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is usually around, women, inequalities in the work, racism, and everybody talks about the I, the inclusion, and I'm always like, so what are you looking at when you're really looking at inclusion? Who else are you including? And it's usually individuals who are in mainstream society who forget to include us. So it goes back to the being active in being in spaces, you can transform them. And what I have realized in the way that people implement triple BEE and the EEA, which is the Employment Equity Act, is often organizations focus on the disability characteristic of albinism. And so, of course, they will innately, because of this huge inequality and shunning of that and misunderstanding, they'll always leave us out. And so this September, I actually challenged a lot of organizations and a lot of corporates to say, well, what about the triple BEE, right? It's easy for you to see a black person and go, yes, we need to hire them. But what about the black person who has albinism? And if you were to look at the role that albinism has for persons with albinism who are black, it doesn't just give an opportunity to do the triple BEE. Here is an immediate, in fact, just parallel opportunity to also qualify for this EEA, Employment Equity Act. Now you don't have to find two people. You don't have to find abs in whatever race who has a visual impairment and then find another black person. Now you have an abs who is a black person and also has a visual impairment or has an invisible impairment, which is usually what my problem is. It's not the eyes. So now you actually achieve both at the same time. And I think because people are separating these things and they are dividing of that and that perception, it misses a huge opportunity to integrate our talents and who we are and to show up as people who are skilled. I also think the idea of bringing persons with impairments, a lot of people who are in the workplace may not be able to innately relate with disability as quickly, and it may be difficult for them, and I think it shouldn't be, but I've experienced that it is, for them to realize, oh, okay, somebody has a certain impairment, they need this kind of support. Often they think, oh no, but it's a privilege. It's reasonable accommodation. I'm just like, who is it reasonable to though? If you don't have the impairment, it can't be reasonable to you. But it's really looking at, here's another opportunity to relate perhaps with another black person, if you are a black person, and realize that, okay, here is a starting point to understand and then connect to reasonable accommodation, which I like to characterize as really empowering your employees with the effective resources to make them efficient and effective at their job, the same job you've hired them for. And I think there also needs to be this, once we have people as allies, then they can really understand that there's no reason why I can't bring, Ate into my art school, or to teach at Gibbs, or all of these opportunities. She is just as talented, and there is no difference. But people get caught up on colorism, and that's something else that's a corporate challenge. And so it's quite layered, but I think for me, my challenge this month was to get organizations to get that, because I don't think they have been able to understand and sit with the dichotomy and the dialectic areas around albinism.
I think just to add extra on what she was saying earlier, I think with sometimes people talk albinism and they don't include, we are so racially divided in the country. People don't include albinism as a, because we are black, yes, but we look like we are white. So sometimes even the abuse that comes are racially based at times. So it's quite important to have that in mind when that happens, when we include the belonging part of issues. Now, with regards to the question you asked, South Africa right now, or rather the AU, has what they call action plan on albinism. So you look at every country is supposed to have a national action plan on albinism that addresses issues, various issues within the albinism space, or the challenges that are there. We, as South Africa, has now developed a national action plan on albinism, which has 9 pillars, focusing on self-representation, which is one of the pillars, which is happening here, where we have artists with albinism and without albinism who are portraying albinism in different formats, which is quite beautiful. We need to be involved in whatever solutions that we come up with. Access to education, healthcare, access to justice, those are formed by people with albinism. So I think involving people with albinism in issues that are there, actioning or actually accepting the National Action Plan on Albinism is one of the issues that we can actually ensure that issues of albinism are addressed. Supporting organizations, supporting artists, supporting different people with albinism who are doing amazing work, like Ake is doing here, is quite important in addressing challenges of persons with albinism in the country.
So I think the next part is for us, like I said, for people to get out of the way. But I also think it needs to be supported within the spaces that we are in. I think the next step is, for me, really, and I keep saying allyship, but you're from a different community than I am, right? And if I had Saxon old people rally behind me, then it's good. Then you have people from Randburg or from, Swaziland or anywhere. Then we have the people around us rallying. Not that we can't do it on our own. We would be leading the change, right? And then we would have allies. Another point that I think needs to happen is that businesses and organizations need to really specify albinism. And here is the reason in their disability policies. And the reason why they've got to do that is, like I said, we fit in a dichotomy within individuals with an impairment, but also within, particularly for black persons with albinism. I think it should be the same for colored or Caucasian or Indian. But particularly looking at the triple BEE, it should be mentioned particularly so that people get it. When people don't mention us, they don't see us, so they don't help us or include us. And so I think that's a huge element that needs to change. I think the next step as well for businesses, there are so many causes in the world, and corporate, their corporate social initiatives or the ESGs don't ever include work within communities for persons with impairments. I was looking at some clients and I said, Okay, so what do you have in your initiatives? Like, yeah, we're helping, agriculture, we're helping environment, we're trying to help communities. And I was like, have you ever tried the albinism community? Perhaps you should go to where our schools are, or these special schools, and realize they are not so special. They need resources and they need the support. So perhaps put your money there, right? If you can see that there is a community with albinism that is struggling with the resources, be it sunscreen, be it visual aid, find that and plug your money there for your social, corporate social initiatives. If you want to be part of this leveling of integrating marginalized persons of any kind of impairment, plug and be deliberate about plugging your money where marginalized communities are. We do not make a shift in including and creating environments where everybody feels they belong if even when we have the opportunity, the resources, and the privilege, and this huge opportunity, we do not take it, we continue to invest it in mainstream society. So I think that is the biggest responsibility for our communities, allyship, and businesses. But the reason why I think that is important, particularly for corporate, is people with money run the world, right? And corporates have the money. I was actually meeting with the client who's from a bank, and they were like, "We don't have money." I'm like, "A bank, Nina," and I was like, "She's fine. Try somebody else," But people who run the world have money. So when the people who have the money, who run the world, put their money where the marginalized are, exactly, you get it. He said it all. So yeah, I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, just to close that thing, I think in closing, right now we have high number of skin cancer cases that are reported. So the sunscreen is actually one of the issues, that the next steps that we need to actually ensure that we close on. Accessibility, because one mother once told me, I don't know if I should buy food or buy sunscreen for my child.
I worry because I'm thinking, my friend is at a very intense cancerous stage. How much pain must he go through? What must happen during that time? And so there is another challenge where our health systems needs to work somehow to better the technology, especially, and the resources, particularly for extreme conditions, so that we are able to get a chance to address health conditions. On my way here with my Uber driver, we were trying to count how many, public hospitals there are that are good and well resourced. And we were just astonished at the fact that Rosebank Clinic, the clinic I was born at and went to, is now all of a sudden a private institution. And just all the resources that they used to give as a child are all gone. So the health system and the government really needs to put this into it. But we do that work. There are a lot of activists that we do that work. And so a lot of money needs to be plugged into these kind of non-profit organizations.
Yeah, with regards to that, that's one of the issues that we're trying to address with government, to say we need to know how many people with albinism are in the country, because if you don't know how many people are there, you cannot account properly, even in terms of ensuring that they have sunscreens and whatnot. Right now, there's an estimate saying the last was 1 in 1,400. There's another one saying 1 in 5,000. So there is a bit of discrepancy, and we've been working with Stats the albinism community in South Africa, to say you need to know how many people with albinism are there. The other challenge is that there is an element of danger to that, in a sense that when people are counting, some would be counting, but then mothers don't want to give, or others don't want to give their address, because then somebody might kidnap their kid. So there's a lot of issues around that. But I would say there is an estimation, but there's something that we are fighting for. Thank you.
There's quite a lot that can be done, and none of it is being done. So I'll start with that. For example, persons with impairments glass doors. All you could do is just put a bright line across a glass door, eye level, so that when I get to the door, I don't kiss the glass door and walk away with a headache. That is something similar, in branding, in the shops. You can really print things big. I don't understand why everybody's sticking with with 8. So it's also just being conscious around everybody around needs to be able to access this space, right? Also around making environments accessible with the steps. It's easy to just put a yellow line on the ground so people can actually look and go, oh, here's a line. And it actually is nice, and it doesn't just help us. So there's quite a lot. Also, in offices now, we've got all this beautiful glass. It's quite intense for persons with albinism. And so having blinds would be great at any given moment. In businesses, you are able to also change the white light, make it warm, And for fancy organizations that have the money, you're able to then put a dimming function. So if it's really intense and abs can just dim it a little bit, So the lighting adaptation is there. There's also quite a lot around working with architecture, but the architectures working with consultants like me who are able to then say, you are able to adapt this environment, but not just for visually impairment persons or persons with albinism, but for everybody else. All these things I'm mentioning are able to benefit everybody else. So it's also really looking, I'd actually like to pick your brain afterwards and see what you do and what spaces you work in.
I am gonna close it there. I'd like to thank Pochope and Abongile Kantini for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, joining us as speakers for the second segment of the panel, which focuses on arts, media, and representation. Here we'll discuss the impact of visual culture and media portrayals and artistic expression in shaping public perceptions and understanding of albinism and disabilities. To comment on the above mentioned topics, I have besides me, and I would like to ask you guys to wave, Ingrid Bame, Nolan Stevens, and Kamogelo Mashaba. Ingrid Bame is a South African content producer and media enthusiast with a passion for storytelling and creating spaces that are inclusive for marginalized groups across Africa. As an activist campaigning the rights of persons with albinism and persons with disability, Ingrid is vocal about issues of inclusivity, particularly those who are often othered in society. She leverages public forums and media platforms to unpack these barriers and explores solutions towards a more equal and inclusive society. Nolan Stevens is an artist, an award-winning artist and art writer whose work addresses race, cultural identity, disability, and social inclusion. His multidisciplinary practice includes art curation and writing, focusing on amplifying marginalized voices. He has collaborated with prestigious institutions such as Unlimited and Smithsonian Museum, as well as local organizations such as South Africa Art Institute and David Croot Publishing. Currently, he serves as the in-house writer and curator at Asisebenza Art Atelier Studios, mentoring artists and curating exhibitions. Stevens combines his passion for visual arts with a commitment to inclusivity, promoting underrepresented perspectives and social justice. Lastly, Kamo is a multidisciplinary artist from Polokwane, Limpopo, specializing in photography, set design, fashion, styling, painting, and printmaking. Inspired by her experiences as a model, she transitioned from being in front of the camera to creatively shaping narratives through vibrant editorials and fine art photography. Her work highlights the interplay of fashion, color, and lighting to tell compelling stories. Additionally, she uses printmaking to spark discussions about living with albinism, blending her zest for life with a desire to educate and inspire her art. Kamkhelo's passion for storytelling infuses every aspect of her creative journey. So before I start, I would like to note on the current representation of persons living with albinism in South African visual culture. The representation of persons living with albinism in South Africa is quite complex and multifaceted. Shaped by cultural, social, and political factors, it is, however, evolving but remains complex, marked by cultural stigma and limited media visibility. While negative perceptions persist, advocacy and artistic efforts are challenging stereotypes and fostering awareness. Educational initiatives are helping to combat bullying and promote understanding in communities. However, challenges like ongoing violence and discrimination still need to be addressed for a more inclusive society. With that being said, I would like to ask the three of you, what are some prevalent misconceptions about persons with albinism, disabilities in South Africa, and how do these misconceptions manifest in art and media?
I think some of the, especially in the entertainment space or the media space, there is sort of a lack of clear representation. I feel like there's kind of like an umbrella term inclusivity that they like to use, especially in ads or campaigns or in film, where they will sort of depict someone with albinism in sort of these forms as with sort of like a sad background or underprivileged or like really struggling to have the resources to survive in the country or in the world as a person with albinism. I feel like there isn't enough research. People don't go and find out from person to person maybe, or sort of make a clear observation as what are the issues, and also how do people deal with them. We don't all deal with them the same way. I, for instance, sort of combat that in a way of expressing myself through my visual art, and not all of us are struggling or going through like a hard time. Sometimes people would ask me questions like, so were you bullied at school? And I'm like, I wasn't bullied. I would get called names and stuff like that, but I didn't get physically bullied or anything that is terrible in school. So at the same time, yes, I do understand that people do have challenges, but they can't represent us under the same umbrella. And I feel our stories need to be told a lot more, and that's sort of what my work does. I represent myself in a sense because I want people to look at me as me, and also not based off of the stories that they know of people with albinism. So I think we still have a lot of work to do. I feel like people need to do more research and have conversations with people in the community instead of just assuming and basing the story off of just maybe like research on the internet. And yeah, I think we need to have more conversations about that.
I think what is quite common, and I'm going to be echoing what Gamo was saying, is that the narrative that we see, whether it's in media, whether it's, in public spaces, it has, unfortunately, that narrative is always a negative narrative relating to persons with albinism. And even with that, we are not, like we say, we are different people. We're individuals at the end of the day. I think every single one who is in this room right now, we're all individuals and we have different stories to tell. However, the story of a person with albinism is always boxed in, and people always assume the worst of what, a person's life with albinism could have looked like or does look like. There are so many things that influence the type of life experiences that we all go through. And as a result, because there has been, media coverage on, the killings, ritual killings of persons with albinism in South Africa and beyond, beyond the country, looking at different African countries as well. And also just, not being properly accommodated, persons with albinism not being well accommodated within schooling systems, within healthcare systems, that narrative becomes the prevailing narrative. And it's unfortunate that that is the only narrative that is there. But there is some form of, we're making progress, probably not good, not quick enough. But even if I had to just have conversations with people in the room right now and just say, when you think of someone with albinism, what is the first thing that comes to mind? A lot of the time, it won't come with, oh yes, someone who's bright and beautiful and has a stunning career and is doing absolutely amazing for themselves, because the narrative that is being pushed is a narrative that has to do with a lot of pity, that has to do with a lot of sorrow, that has to do with a lot of poverty as well. So that are the challenges that we are facing as persons with albinism, and the type of representation that we're trying to change. Yeah.
Well said. So from my perspective, obviously I echo what my colleagues have just said. From my perspective, so South Africa as a whole is a space that deals with identity politics on a daily, which is that the identity politics that we as South Africans deal with tend to be racial identity politics, right? So when it comes to the aspect of disability is usually, like 80%, put onto the side of people who use wheelchairs, right? So anything that is access meant in a space generally is meant for people with disability, with wheelchair use, right? And that is because when it comes to looking at the nuances of disability, this country doesn't really look at specifics when it comes to difference, right? And that makes it really difficult for people with albinisms, or any other variation of a disability to exist in this country, right? I just wanted to preface this by stating that. When it comes to how the media represents people who are othered or people with disabilities, as my colleagues have said, it's usually from a negative point of view, it's negative context. The most recent example and most popular example I can think of is the Shaka series that we've just had on DSTV, right? Where the person with disability was seen in a very negative light, or presented in a very negative light, right? And that tends to be the way it's done. You even look at, and I think I've spoken about this with Ati at some point, movies such as Powder, right, which is like a very old movie. When you look at how that character was represented, it was like this mystic character who had special abilities and needed to be treated a certain way, and there was something weird and off about that character. So if you are othered, particularly in this country, the othering is amplified more so than it would be in Europe or any other part of the country of the world, And I think it's just because these conversations are not had, As a writer, I'll give you a different example. Sorry, I'm running out too bit long here. But as a writer, I tend to write a lot about visual arts. We had an artist come through from the UK, Yinka Shonibare, who has a disability, and he is a seriously prolific artist. And I had just had a whole interview with him and did this interview for Art Africa. And in the interview, I had spoken about his practice, but also about the fact that I was going to go to the same space and studio that he started his practice in London. And the whole section we had spoken about disability just got cut, because that is not the narrative in this country, right? And at the time, the editor sent me a copy and said, is this okay? I noticed the cut, but I thought, let me not say anything. Let me not rock the boat, because this is what people with disability tend to deal with on a daily basis. I am less than, I am other than, I should not rock the boat. And it is only once I went on this residency program in London, Unlimited, that I actually had some sort of self-confidence. I didn't look at mirrors, I didn't look at any reflections of myself. And this is a person who has gone to university, studied art, done art in university, dealing with disability, right? But I still had a self-perception of myself of being less than, until I had seen other people in the UK who were dealing with disability in the many variations of disability that they are, and very proudly so. The point I'm making, and it's a very roundabout point, is that shows like Atisha, which talks about the many forms of albinism, not only from her perspective, but from a multitude of perspectives, as we can see with the panels that we have today, as well as the artists who are on show. It's not just a solo exhibition. She's sharing the platform with other artists and different perspectives. We start seeing a variation of what it means to be a person living with disability. And for everybody else who does not live within that context, what that does is give us insight. What that does is give us understanding. What that does is not look at people with albinism as other. So that is my 2 cents in that one.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to ask you guys again, how does art, media, and advocacy intersect in your work, and what are the benefits of this collaboration for raising awareness about albinism and disabilities?
When it comes to my work, it's more of a self-representation. That's sort of where my advocacy comes in. I always had this notion of like running away from the fact that I have albinism. I didn't want people to look at that at face value. I sort of wanted people to look at the things that I can do, like, oh, I'm creative, oh, I like this, I'm great at this thing. But I also realized in a sense that I was running away from myself and sort of representing myself. And it's sort of like a saying, you kind of have to deal with yourself to help other people. You need to go inwards so that you can help people. So my work came from just, I wanted to be represented in a certain way, especially because I'm in the entertainment space or the media space. And particularly, I have a background in modeling. So I've always been fascinated by that. I've always wanted to be on magazine covers, despite the fact that I don't meet the requirements because I'm short. So I've always envisioned myself on a Vogue cover, on a Dazed magazine cover, and I created those covers myself. So I started out as a model, then briefly, and then after that I went into photography because I was interested in the behind the scenes. But I realized when I had ideas in mind and I tried to tell photographers, this is what I want, they wouldn't understand. So then I took it upon myself. I realized that, oh, I actually do have an eye for creative direction. Cool. So I would create sets at home, set up my camera, model, and make my own props. And that's sort of the work that you will see upstairs. That's what came out of that. So I use my work as representing the girl, the little child inside that's always wanted to be on a cover of Vogue or be a high fashion editorial model, regardless of the requirements that I don't meet and the fact that there isn't a lot of representation in those spaces. So yeah, I used myself, I guess, as a case study or as an example, and that's sort of how that's a way of advocacy. And then the way that speaks to the exhibition. I mean, your work is actually self-portraits. That's funny that you have portraits of yourself and you are sort of like having conversations at home on the dinner table. And my work is also self-portraits of myself, and I'm somewhat, you're also like representing yourself in that version, in the version that of yourself that you know and that you want people to see. And I do the same. And also just the fact that the settings of all the photographs that I took were actually at home. Kind of like how you were sitting at home and having conversations. I was at home setting up things, taking this from my mom's room, taking this from my aunt's room to create the set and have that as a visual representation. So I just take from what I have and create what I want other people to see and learn and take from it.
So I'm a big supporter of representation and self-representation, because as Kamal's just said, if you don't represent yourself and you let somebody else represent your story, that there's going to be something that misses in that whole thing, you know. So self-representation is a huge thing. For me, I also think that art in itself is kind of a cool thing, right? Art is like, it's like your ticket into coolness, you know. Like if you want to be cool, you go to an art exhibition. You know, if you have an artwork of yourself up, you're kind of cool, right? So why not have people who don't look like the preferred norm in an artwork? Why not have people be associated to coolness? And that's what art does in various forms, whether it's film, fashion, design, you know, that's what art does. So why not open those doors to other people who aren't representative of the norm in inverted commas, you know. And I think that's what art does, is it allows us to not only tell our own stories through different mediums, but it allows us to be seen as the cool. Because for so long, whether it's people with albinism or people with disability, have not been seen as cool. So I think art allows us to be seen as cool.
I'd like to bring in just the advocacy element to, you know, what the discussion is, because if we think about it, the reason why we have to advocate for a certain cause is because there is something that is unjust that would be happening. This is throughout the spectrum. This isn't just related to albinism and related to persons with disability. For people to actually take up a cause and advocate, whether it's gender-based violence, you know, whether it's access to education, whether it's reproductive access to reproductive health, these are the challenges that people are facing. And because these challenges exist, and because we are able then, or rather they are people that take up, you know, a stance where they either speak about this, whether they're pushing policy, whether they're pushing art, which is obviously what we're talking about, that becomes such a powerful tool to show society and to depict in society what we want that work to represent, you know. For those who haven't seen the art pieces upstairs, Ate's work, Gamo's work, it's absolutely incredible, beautiful work that is being put out there. And it's a form of advocacy because it's depicting what we ordinarily don't see and what we ordinarily don't come across when it comes to talking about or depicting persons with albinism. A lot of the time, like we've mentioned, I've been to a number of, you know, galleries and, you know, seen through photography, seen through certain writing where, you know, it is talking about the struggles of persons with albinism. It is talking about the ritual killings. And even in the work, what actually ventured me or led me to the work that I do, which I'll talk to, you know, as we continue in the conversation, is that I was getting a bit tired of the fact that this is the only narrative that exists, and the advocacy for that work is absolutely necessary, and it is ongoing because as we sit here, we don't know. I think a couple of weeks ago there was a young girl in Mozambique who was kidnapped, you know. So it is a necessary narrative, however, it isn't the only narrative, and the work that is being done with artists like Gamo and artists like Ate, even if it is self-representations, that they're showing a different side to what advocacy could look like. You know, they're showing that being able to depict yourself in a positive life is a form of advocacy that says that I am not someone who's constantly worried about my safety. I am someone who has dreams, who has ambition, I have skill, I have talent, and this is what I'm showcasing through the work that I'm doing. So the narrative, or rather not the narrative, but advocacy does play a very vital role on how it is that, you know, a person with albinism are depicted. And, you know, going back to what we were saying, a positive narrative needs to be built, and I don't think a lot of artists will come forward with that because what they've seen is the negative story, and I think that then makes it the responsibility of persons with albinism, of persons with disability, to change that narrative for themselves and for them to showcase their work beyond what society is depicting them to be. And even with that, I think it's also important for, I think, general society to get a feel of something that isn't, how do I put it, that isn't the shame story for persons with albinism. It's a necessary narrative, absolutely. We need to be talking about it. I think we've heard it from the previous panel of, you know, what actions need to be taken, you know, what are the challenges that are there, but that isn't the only thing that exists.
So I am going to ask the last question, and this is for all of you guys. In your view, what are the most significant changes needed in societal perceptions of persons with albinism, disabilities, and how can they be achieved? And maybe I could be more specific. Maybe, Ingrid, you could talk about your campaign, which is the I Am Movement, and Nolan about disability arts, and Gamo about being a creative. Just a quick comment on that, please.
I feel like I'm kind of going to be repeating myself, but it's okay. You know, when I initially started doing work within the albinism space, within the disability space, it wasn't a matter of, oh, I want to change the world or anything like that. I had come across, and I think kudos to, you know, a lot of, whether it's South African or international models with albinism, that were kind of rising. This is around 2013, 2014, 2015. And they were coming up out of the shadows, and we were seeing, you know, different, you know, models, you know, some works feeling very creature-ish, which is a bit cringe, but nonetheless. I was, I think, disturbed by the fact that I wasn't finding anything in media that was representing the kind of life that I lived. Because surely I am not the only person who has albinism, who was able to go to a good school, get proper education, a bit of bullying here and there, but that wasn't my entire life story. And with that, I looked and I searched, and there wasn't much that was out there in terms of in media spaces that, you know, gave, you know, stories of, for instance, a Tando Hopper, for example. And with that, I had to find myself in spaces such as these where I would have to engage with other people who had albinism, to hear their stories. But with that, that's when I came to learn that there are so many other people with albinism that are, you know, flourishing in their careers, that have dreams that have very little to do with them having albinism. Just being regular individuals that have dreams, that have aspirations, you know, things that they'd like to achieve. But these stories were not being put out there. And as time went, you know, we saw that, for instance, with the UN Independent Expert on the rights, the enjoyment of human rights by persons with albinism, more people with albinism actually started being more vocal on the work that they're doing. And it felt like it was then my responsibility to bring that out into the media. You know, this is through TV, this is through radio, this is through print, you know, and digital media, and that's what I leveraged. And the more stories that I told, like for instance, there's a pageant in Zimbabwe that is Mr. and Miss Albinism Zimbabwe, which is now Mr. and Miss Albinism Africa, which was a platform that then allowed for persons with albinism to come showcase, strut their stuff, you know, and, you know, being able to take that title and represent persons with albinism in different platforms throughout the country, and the continent. It was like, okay, there's something here, you know. Then you came across where they, for instance, with the Center of Human Rights, which I worked with, where they wanted to depict the albinic body, but not in the sense of what do people with albinism look like? What does a child with albinism look like? What does a teen with albinism look like? What does a woman who is married, has kids, what does that look like? What is a person who's old, who's, you know, a senior citizen with albinism, what do they look like? Because this was a depiction of, as just a person, what do you look like outside of, you know, the narrative around that? And that in itself has led to so many engagements that I've had, so many campaigns that I've had to run, relating to, you know, a positive depiction of persons with albinism. But also, I think the most important thing that I'm always trying to champion is that the narrative related or talking about persons with albinism, whether it's, you know, about ritual killings, or whether it's about the exhibition that we have, unfortunately has also been blocked in to say that these conversations will only happen during International Albinism Awareness Day, which is on the 13th of June, or this will happen in South Africa during the month of September. And unfortunately, we're in September right now. And it's to say, when are we then going to stop boxing persons with albinism and showcasing their talent, showcasing their work, beyond these two specific calendar dates that we have in our society? You know, when do we have someone with albinism being portrayed as just a nurse who works in a clinic, and they are acting on a series, and that's it? You know, the narrative has nothing to do with them having albinism. I am a woman, a black woman who is a nurse, who's acting on a series as a nurse, and the narrative has nothing to do with albinism. So I think It's quite important with the work that I do to ensure that persons with albinism are depicted in a positive light, but also for there to be normality around albinism, for there to be normality around disability, for the platforms that we occupy to not be platforms that only talk about albinism and only talk about our disability and only talk about our challenges and how we're overcoming these challenges, but just as a normal individual that's going about life, going about your career, going about family, going about relationships, and that being, because in that way, that is a form of advocacy, and that is a form of creating normalcy, and not for us to always be boxed in conversations that have to do with albinism and that have to do with disability, and that's about it.
I think, like the first thing, I think as people, we always concerned about what stands out when you meet someone else. You're always concerned about, oh, you're this, you're that, you don't have this. And I really think we do need to sometimes put those things aside and sort of just look at who the person is apart from what they look like or what they have and what they don't have. And secondly, as an artist, like I mentioned earlier, that one of the things that I was trying to do is make noise about the other things that I do and not sort of kind of shift the conversation away from the fact that I've got albinism. Let's talk about my fashion first. Let's talk about what I do first. Let's talk about my rings, my accessories, or the fact that I like color, or the fact that I'm an artist, or what I'm wearing, or my quirky glasses. Let's talk about that first. And then maybe we can get into, oh, okay, so how is life as a person with as a person with albinism, as an artist, or how do you take photos with visual impairment? Then we can get into that after. I think my work, I chose intentionally to be bold, but not just in my work, but in my personality. I sort of live like this. I want people to remember my impact, not just based on what I have. Like what Ingrid mentioned, can I just be a regular girl who's an artist or who's working a 9-to-5 and that's it? I feel like we need to see a lot of that, especially in the film and TV industry. There's always just one person who's acting a role and they have albinism. Yes, they do play a role as a regular person, but I would like to see more of those. I would, like, why not have a whole family acting in a series? Why not have a campaign with only models with different shapes, different sizes, but they all have albinism? Like, that would be cool. I mean, I saw what Johan did right now with his collection, where he had like a group of models with albinism, not just one. I really like that. But yeah, I'd like to see more, kind of like on the runway, where they would have a specific size of models, and now I see that they have more plus size models. So I would like to see more of that on the runway, and I think I am contributing to that. I'm making noise about it. I'm trying to put myself out there, and who knows, maybe one day I'll walk the runway.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with both of my colleagues. In terms of what I do as an arts writer, curator, artist, I think when it comes to like disability arts, it becomes very, very difficult, right? Particularly in the context of this country, because this country, as I've mentioned before, doesn't deal with that, right? But if you look at it, so what I do is I tend to write about disability for countries such as the UK or Australia, you know, and then talk about our stories in those contexts, right? Luckily enough, this exhibition allowed me to write about these complexities for a South African audience. So I was very, very thankful for this exhibition to happen. But what I also managed to do within my practice is speak about the challenges or disabilities, if I can call that, of everyday people, right? So if you look at like Black people, for example, which most of us in the country are, like working with artists, because I work in an artist studio, most artists would think, okay, I cannot speak about these topics because this isn't an art topic. I have to speak about affluency, right? Or I need to title my work in Latin, you know, for example. And my job is to steer them away from that. My job is to say, no, more titles in indigenous languages, more wall text in indigenous languages, you know. And then people will say, Yeah, but what if they don't understand? And my pushback to that is, how many times have you been into an exhibition or taken your parents into an exhibition and you don't understand what the hell is written on the wall because it's written in art legalese, right? And then you have to explain this stuff to your parents or your family or your friends, but you can barely understand this stuff because firstly, it's not in your home language. Secondly, it's referencing a language we don't even speak, Latin, you know? So how many times have we as Black people, just in general, been othered, right? So in terms of my practice, is what I do is I speak about the challenges that everyday people have to deal with. And I think because of my stance as a disabled person, I'm able to see those more keenly, you know? So I'll speak about things like, spoke about language, things like, should we talk about the fact that you grew up in a casa, you know? Or the fact that you watched TV as a child through a window, you know? Why not? If that was your reality, why not? Because if you don't speak about those things, people who have lived those realities won't know that that is something that they don't have to be ashamed of. In the same way that Ati's talking about, Ati and Kamo and the other artists in this exhibition are speaking about the realities of people with albinism, If they don't make these kinds of works, students, for example, who don't know that this is possible to do this, won't do that because it's not getting taught in our art schools. It's not getting taught as part of our art curriculums. You know, so students won't know that they're allowed to do this because artists who do deal with these topics are not being taught in our schools. So if school groups come to exhibitions like this, there'll be like 1, 2, maybe 5 students who are touched by this and think, hey, I can talk about that. I can speak about this. I might not have albinism, but my cousin does. So maybe I can talk about that. And that's what these kinds of things allow us for, both in the media space and in spaces like galleries.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our panelists, Mpho Jope, Abongile Kantini, Kamukhelo Mashaba, Nolan Stevens, and Ingrid Bame, for sharing your expertise and perspectives.